Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back. In today's episode, I'm going to be painting the LS block and installing all the bottom end components. First, we put on a Rust-Oleum metal primer to give the paint a better surface to adhere to, and hopefully last the life of the engine. Currently, I'm using the Rust-Oleum Protective Enamel, which is an oil-based paint that should be the most durable. I went with the gloss black look to try to keep the engine bay very minimal and clean. They also offer this in a spray can, but I've found that painting an engine block's a lot easier just with a paintbrush, and you can get inside all like the little nooks and crannies, and just makes it a little bit easier and I think it lasts longer because it adheres to every part of the engine block. Here I'm just using a light to try to make sure that I got in every single spot so that there's no missed spots and it looks as good as it can. Now onto the other side. Now that the engine is done being painted, we can go ahead and start the rebuild. I like to start with the middle main bearing, but it really doesn't matter as long as all the tongues on the bearings line up with the slots in the block. It is really important to make sure that the top of the bearing isn't sticking up at all and is flush with the sides so that when you put the main caps on, it won't crush or move the bearing. Now that the center one is installed, we can go ahead and move on to all the other ones. You just repeat this process 4 more times, and then you're all set and ready to put the bearings in the main caps. As you can see, I always try to wipe the bearing surface clean of any possible debris to try to prevent the bearing from failing prematurely. Now that all the bearings are installed on this side, I can go ahead and start lubing them all up and getting them ready for the crank to go in. Again, it's important to not get any assembly grease on the top of the bearing, but only on the inside and the sides of it. Now that the bearings are greased, we can throw the crank in. You want to do this slowly to make sure you don't smash or move the bearings you just installed. It should slide in easily as long as everything was inspected before installation. And there we go. Time to put all the main cap bearings in. First, I'm just going to start off by making sure that all of the surfaces inside where the bearing is going to sit is clearing. I already shot some PB Blaster or brake clean in there. Now I'm just going to wipe it out with my finger and then place the bearing in there. And then after we place it in there, we're going to lube it up with some engine assembly lube. Here's the bearings that I got. I'll show you the box after. Hopefully I remember. Then we're going to be able to stick these main caps back in. I like to start with the thrust bearing just because it has the most surface to clean. LS motors are really easy where they just have the tang on the bearing already, so you can automatically know where it's going to be. It's in there so that it's flush. Again, just like greasing the bearings on the block side, you want to make sure you get the lube on the bearing and not on the cap. Now we can go throw them in. Oh, here's the, almost forgot. Here's the part number for the bearings I got.
I like to start with the end caps. They shouldn't take much force at all to get pushed down. This one I had to tap with the mallet, but usually they just slide right in place, as you'll see with the other four.
First, we're just going to start by torquing them. You do a special sequence, as I'll demonstrate here, and you're only going to 15 foot-pounds, and that's after you already just do them by hand tight. I'm still going to probably sink them down a little more. They're probably pretty far away from 15 foot-pounds, but now we can get started.
Now that all the main cap bolts are 15 foot-pounds, I go ahead and put the side bolts in, and those get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. Now for the final torque spec, for the inners, it's 80 degrees past what we already did, and then for the outers, it's 51 degrees past what we already did. And that'll be the final torque spec, and it'll be ready to go. Now you just want to make sure that it spins over freely, and ours did. So now we can go ahead and start cleaning up the pistons. I'm reusing the pistons that came out of this engine, so I went out and got some chem dip to try to clean up the pistons, and I was pleasantly surprised with the results, as you'll see shortly.
I just want it to definitely be enough to get inside the wrist pins, free all that up. Probably just gonna let them sit for about an hour. Okay, it's been 30 minutes. Let's take a look.
Disclaimer, I would not use the same toothbrush to brush your teeth afterwards. It did not perform the same.
Anywhere there was an extreme buildup, I mean, if you look in comparison to this, to this, I mean, you can see a drastic difference, especially inside the piston. Look in the skirt, looks really good down in there. Probably gonna let it sit for another 30 minutes. It's only been 30, so you can leave this in for up to 4 hours. I'm just gonna knock off some of the loose stuff, and hopefully it'll reach in those.
Now that the pistons are all cleaned up, and they came out really nice, I'm just going to remove the piston rings that are currently in it, get rid of any more grime that might be in there, and then we can install our new rings. I cannot say enough good things about how the chem dip worked on these. I mean, you saw how bad they were to begin with, and now they look almost like brand new pistons.
First part is just to make sure that the oil ring goes on. The 2 tabs right here face towards the top, so it'll actually go in the orientation like this. These bottom oil rings are super easy. Now you just slide it into the bottom of the groove, slowly work it around, make sure it stays in the bottom. And then just over here, make sure it doesn't scrape on the side. It slides right in. And you do the same thing now with the top one. These you don't need to use any kind of tool. It's because they're so thin and easy to work. So now you just go on the top, start it in the groove, work it around. It slides right in. Then just give it a little twist, make sure it slides. Now you grab your tool. The second ring has a spot where it says top. I don't know if it's easy to read. It says top right there. So you're just going to grab your tool. And you get your top one. There's no marking on this one that I could find. Just do that same thing for 8 pistons.
Once the rings are all installed, I prepare the connecting rod bearings on the piston side and the cap so that I can throw them both in together. Again, you want to make sure that there's no debris or anything under these bearings, just to make sure that they last as long as possible. And you want to make sure that they're flush with the end of the cap. Now after all the prep, we can finally throw these in. I got this Summit Racing piston ring compressor just to make sure that there's no chance of it getting hung up on the sides, and it was specific for this size engine, so it was pretty easy. You should be able to push this down with not too much force. You can hammer it a little bit with just the back end of a hammer, but just make sure that you're not gouging it into the crank. That's the only thing that you really have to worry about down there. And without much effort, the spring compressor will pop off, and that means that the piston is at least fully in the bore. Now that the piston bottomed out on the crank, we can go ahead and get our end cap, put that on, and it'll be fully mated to the crank. Now we flip to the opposite side and we put the other piston on that journal. Again, make sure that it goes in smoothly. And then once I put each piston in, I rotate the engine over to make sure that there's no harsh spots. Here's a view from the bottom so you can better understand what's kind of going on. So these are the end caps I'm putting on there. So you wait for the piston to come down, and then you can tighten the end cap on. Now one final rotation to see how it moves, and it's perfect.
This is the camshaft that I have going in. Here's the cam card if anybody's interested.
Make sure to generously oil the camshaft. You also want to make sure you go slow and try to stay as level as you can to not ruin the cam bearings. I like to use some bolts on the end just so you have a little extra leverage and it's easier to push it in 100% of the way. I highly recommend getting all new front hardware for your LS, so like cam retainer, timing chain set, tensioner, front cover. It's all pretty cheap and it's an insurance policy that you can save some time from doing it twice, or worse, you might even be rebuilding the engine because of it. I've heard many people complain about these tensioners, and they say that they have a lot of problems. Knock on wood, I haven't had any issues with one so far, so I'm going to keep running it. What I did have issues with though was trying to get this cam gear lined up to make sure that it was all timed correctly. I don't know why, usually it's pretty simple, but for some reason it didn't want to go. Couldn't get the bolt holes lined up. Finally got it to go, but man, was that a struggle. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Next up is going to be the heads and all the top end stuff. I hope you guys like, sub, and I'll see you on the next one.